Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Solosode of another gaming podcast. My name is Dustinkreis, and this episode, I am supposed to sit here on my own and talk to you about a genre that is not really one of my favorite genres out there. I enjoy some things in it, but we're going to talk about the horror genre. And I guess thinking about it, I it's not really a genre I particularly care for. I don't. I find most of the movies to be just kind of jump scares and just gore for gore's sake, and I don't know. It just doesn't do anything for me. But there are some things in the genre that I do like. I prefer more like psychological horror. Things, not so much that makes you jump and makes you, scream and gets your heart racing, but things that like afterwards you think about and really kind of terrorizes you. And yeah, I'm not a huge survival horror gamer. There's a lot of games out there that I've played, but there's a lot of games out there that I haven't. But we'll talk about some of those, and probably the one series that it really does stick with me as far as horror games go. We'll talk about that when we get there. But starting off, I don't know what it is about horror. It's just something that's never really interested me as a consumer of media, I guess. And it seems like there are so many horror movies out there. It's kind of hard to sort of separate what's good and what's bad. But some things I've watched over the years that are I guess typical horror. I've watched can't talk. I watched the Sleepaway Camp trilogy as a kid. That's just kind of a schlocky, I guess, not riff, but a sort of hey, they did Friday the 13th, let's do this. I watched that. I watched some of the Friday the 13th. I've watched some of the, or not, yeah, Friday the 13th. I watched some of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. They're just not something that ever really stuck with me. Things like Pet Sematary and like the really bad old Stephen King movies. I'd always watch those, but I'd watch them because they were more often than not kind of funny. I was a big fan of the Scream, I guess, quadrology now. It's not really a trilogy. There's 4 of them. Big fan of those movies for some reason. And then like the whole slasher boom that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, the rest of the movies I didn't really ever watch. Like I didn't watch, I Know What You Did Last Summer. Or, I remember watching Urban Legend and thinking it was really dumb. But for some reason, Scream really stuck with me. I think it was just sort of the skewering of horror movies and things like that. But one thing I do watch that is, I guess, horror-based, but not too many people talk about it in that regard, is the films of David Lynch. And there's something about David Lynch and the way that he can tap into sort of the ideas of like nightmares and dreams and sort of I don't know. There's something about it that always reminds me of every bad dream I've ever had, and it terrifies me to some regard. There's the scene in Mulholland Drive with the hobo behind the diner, and that scene in Mulholland Drive is still probably one of the best exercises in tension and release. But then when the release happens, you wish it never happened, because the whole time, and this is a spoiler if you haven't seen Mulholland Drive, but the whole time this guy's talking about this nightmare he had, and basically the nightmare he's had the night before is the exact same scenario he's finding himself in now. And he's talking about how it fills him with dread, and how when he walked behind the restaurant they were in, there was this, evil being there. And, of course follows follows the storyline to a T. And the whole time you're sitting there and you're waiting and you're waiting, and there's just this tension of waiting, and then finally the event happens. And the first time I saw Mulholland Drive, I mean, I jumped out of my seat. And there's a lot of these moments, these weird little moments in David Lynch films that you feel very uneasy, and then all of a sudden that uneasiness kind of turns into this sort of overwhelming terror. One of the big scenes I can remember is in excuse me, I have a head cold, and it's making talking a little difficult. One of the big scenes I can remember is in Inland Empire, and they're, when you look at them objectively, they're very innocuous scenes. Like, there's nothing bad happening in them. It's just there's something about them that are very unsettling. And one of them is the picture that I've used to open up the episode. It's Laura Dern, and the character is in distress in the movie when this happens, but nothing like really terrifying happens. It's just it's such a uneasy scene to watch. I don't know. It just made me feel very uneasy, and then it just kind of kept going and kept going and kept going, and like the uneasiness of the scene just never really let up. And it's a scene. It's all it is just Laura Dern running towards the camera. Really kind of a dumb thing when you think about it, but there's something with the way it's lit and I guess the mindset you're in from that moment in Inland Empire, because you're about halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way through the film at that time, and Inland Empire is a very unsettling film to begin with, because it so closely approximates what it's like to be like stuck in a dream nightmare, and that just works a lot better for me than some guy with a knife running around slashing people. Like, that's not scary to me. That's just kind of that's kind of fantasy land, I guess. Whereas something about like the films of David Lynch, even though they go pretty bizarre and pretty crazy, there's always this underlying sense of reality, I guess, that, I don't know, it just sticks in my mind all the time. So there's that one scene. And then the other scene is it's just a really kind of dumb scene, but it like made me like curl back in my chair. I don't know what it is, but it's just the scene of this Russian, or maybe it's Polish. I can't remember if they're in Poland or in Russia. But just this street. And then all of a sudden, from the side of the screen, these two faces come in very close to the camera. And there was just something so terrifying about seeing these faces just pop into the side of the frame that it made me like actually convulse, not convulse, but like recoil back in my seat. And it kind of stuck with me. And that's the kind of stuff that I find more interesting in horror than just jump scares and some guy wearing a mask. And that's an incredibly personal thing. A lot of people can go watch a horror film and enjoy it and get have their thrills, but I don't know, that doesn't do anything for me. If I want to be scared, I want to be really scared. So and then there's things like Twin Peaks, which the third season just came out, and my fiance likes to watch American Horror Story, and I watch it with her, and most of the time I'm just sitting there thinking, wow, this is really, really overwrought, really, like they're exhausting themselves just trying to get some kind of tension on the screen, and it never really pays off the correct way for me, I guess. I don't know. It just never seems really particularly scary. It just seems, like edgy, and like we're pushing content onto the TV screen. But anyway, so she watches that, and we're watching the new season, and I'm just sitting there thinking, like, man, this show bends itself over backwards trying to get to, just a slight point that Twin Peaks gets to. And really, that what I'm meaning by that is there are moments in Twin Peaks that while the show is really funny and really, weird and kooky, there are absolute moments of terror in this show. I can remember the first time I saw Bob jump over the couch in one of the episodes and just being, just jumping back in my seat. Again, it's this thing that David Lynch does a lot where he has somebody come close to the camera. They put you in the POV of the character and have, someone come close to the camera. Almost, ridiculously close, because you're not supposed to break that fourth wall, but he does that a lot for, this effect of, making you jump back from the screen. So that was always a thing. But really, Twin Peaks for me got really just utterly terrifying when you got to the film Fire Walk with Me. And I will argue that Fire Walk with Me is probably one of the hardest films I've ever made it through. And once you get to like the last 2/3 of the film, I mean, the word nightmare is not strong enough to it's not strong enough to really explain, what you're watching on the screen, because it's so raw and it's so real, and it's not, somebody wearing a mask running around, gleefully slashing people. This is probably the most homegrown form of terror anyone can ever watch. And it is a harrowing experience, but it's probably one of the most important experiences in Twin Peaks to realize what the entire show is trying to do. And then, of course, you have Blue Velvet, which kind of, treads the same ground as Fire Walk with Me and Twin Peaks in general, but yeah, it's that same idea that, sometimes horror isn't really meant to be fun. Maybe it's supposed to make you feel bad, and maybe like, oh, this is... It kind of keeps you grounded in a way, I guess. My fiance asked me why I watch movies like this, and it's like, well, when you watch a horror movie that makes you think it's fun, it kind of takes something away from it, I guess. And if it's a horror movie that's truly horrific, then it makes you think, of course the cats want to eat while I'm recording this. It kind of makes you think that, I don't know, it kind of keeps the horror in perspective, I guess, that these things are supposed to be horrific and hard to watch. And I guess that goes into the film Funny Games, which if you guys haven't seen Funny Games and you like horror movies, I would definitely say watch it, because you will probably hate it, because it removes everything that you love about horror movies and makes it just an unbearable, it's so unbearably tense, that movie, because it feels so visceral and so real. It takes away all the sort of glee, I guess, from watching a horror movie. It leaves you nothing but with the grim reality of what, what these movies would probably really be like. So, Funny Games, check that movie out if you haven't watched it. But, other than the films of David Lynch, the only other things I've really gotten into are I guess ghost haunting movies always kind of work for me. I really like The Ring. I really liked The Others, but I don't really know if you'd consider these movies horror. I kind of consider them more thrillers. And maybe that's my thing. I just prefer thrillers to outright horror movies. Because I subscribe to a guy on YouTube that he's a big horror movie collector, and it's not particularly that I'm interested in these horror movies that he's talking about. It's just I like his style, and sometimes it's fun just to watch what other people are interested in. So that's kind of where my thing with that channel comes from. But I'm watching this and I'm just like, oh my god, there's no possible way I could sit there through all these movies and just be like, I'd be so bored, and I would just start MST3K riffing on these movies. But yeah, things like The Others and The Ring, I prefer that kind of stuff to the Freddys and the Jasons and Leatherface and that kind of stuff. So, But as far as movie goes, I think that's pretty much all I need to talk about with movies. Things like David Lynch that makes you like the movies that just make you feel weird. Not necessarily weird, but they stay with you after watching them. I guess in some regards, like the Blair Witch Projects, or Blair Witch Project, the new movie wasn't that great. And even the first Paranormal Activity kind of stuck with me a little bit after watching it. Like, because you just lay in bed and you hear your fridge kick on and stuff like that, and you just be like, crap. I don't know. It's something that kind of stuck with me. So. But as far as games go, I remember playing the first, when I got my, well, actually, no, even before I got my PlayStation 2, because I never owned a PlayStation 1 when it first came out. I didn't play PlayStation 1 games until I got my PlayStation 2. I remember being an N64 kid and just being through the roof that we were finally getting Resident Evil 2 on the N64. And if you want to talk about, like, just amazing technological feats, getting that game on a cartridge, that I remember that cartridge, it weighs as much as a brick, and it's just ridiculous. But anyway, I remember getting that one Christmas, and of course I never really understood how to play it when I first put it in, so I had to start over multiple times, but finally I got the hang of it. But I just remember just falling in love with Resident Evil 2, and I thought, man, this is a great, great series. And yeah, I once I got my PlayStation 2, I bought more of the Resident Evils. I bought Resident Evil 1 Director's Cut, and I bought Resident Evil 3. And I didn't really care for Resident Evil 3 as much. Resident Evil 1 was, I really enjoyed that. I thought that was really good. But Resident Evil 3, I wasn't so crazy on. And I don't know why. I think it just kind of took a step backwards from... it kind of took a step back from what Resident Evil 2 did in a lot of ways, by just having one protagonist. And, I don't know, the whole Nemesis thing kind of worked, but kind of not really, I guess. But yeah, I remember playing these Resident Evils, and every time a new Resident Evil came out, like Code Veronica or Resident Evil 4, I would just rush out and buy them. And then, somewhere along the way, my love of the series just completely dropped off. And I can't really point to a reason why. I think there was just a long break between me playing Resident Evils, and then I got Resident Evil Revelations, and just, I don't know, just something about it, I just didn't care about it anymore. I was like, oh my god, this has gotten so convoluted and ridiculous and crazy that I just can't stick with it anymore. And then I played Resident Evil 5 with a friend of mine, and we had fun because we were playing together, but I wouldn't necessarily have played that game all the way through if it wasn't for the fact that I was playing with somebody, because I was just getting so frustrated with it. And even with, like, more modern Resident Evil-like games like Shadows of the Damned and The Evil Within, I think that Resident Evil 4 style, when it came out on the GameCube, I mean, I loved Resident Evil 4. I thought it was like the pinnacle of survival horror. But anymore nowadays, like, it makes the game feel more actiony, I guess, and not really horror. Because, I don't know, you have so much ammo, and there's so many ways to deal with the threats that are coming at you. I mean, on a gameplay standpoint, that's great, but as a horror thing, it's kind of gone the way of, I don't know, like Alien, the movie Alien, which I never talk about the Alien series, but it's sci-fi horror. But I love that series. But Alien, very claustrophobic, very horror movie, whereas Aliens is more of an action movie. So, like old school survival horror is more like Alien, whereas Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, that is more akin to the movie Aliens, which is more of an action movie, where they're dealing with multiple xenomorphs and just blowing them away. Which both movies are great, but eventually you kind of prefer one or the other. So yeah, Resident Evil's kind of dropped off for me. I hear Resident Evil 7 is really good, but I haven't picked it up yet. It's going to be one of those games that I pick up when it gets like really cheap. So yeah, what else? Silent Hill. Now, as Resident Evil has kind of lost it for me, Silent Hill has really stuck with me through the years. And again, I'm not gonna be able to do this. I'm trying to play Final Fantasy 12 while doing this, and I'm in an area where I actually have to think playing it, and it's not really working. So anyway, Silent Hill. I remember playing the first one, and I was just amazed at how the game used its weaknesses as a strength, which is they couldn't really do a very far draw distance because they actually did the game full 3D, not pre-rendered like Resident Evil. So they couldn't do the draw distances very far, so they just put a bunch of fog in it. Well, then the fog actually makes the game even more scary. And the storyline of Silent Hill, I thought, completely blew away everything that Resident Evil did. Like, yeah, Resident Evil is cool, but at the end of the day, it's just like a sci-fi experiment gone bad story. Whereas there's so much more like lore and history. It feels like there's real history to the Silent Hill series. And I think that's why Silent Hill, for me anyway, works a lot better. The first the first game story is so iconic, and it was of course adapted into the Silent Hill movie, which I still consider one of the best video game adaptations ever made. So yeah, a little drink of coffee there. But anyway, where was I? Oh yes, Silent Hill 1. But yeah, the storyline is so good and so impactful, I think. And the hokey voice acting is one thing, but I really think the story stands the test of time. And you gotta give the props to Silent Hill because it created one of my favorite series of all time and one of my favorite games of all time, which is Silent Hill 2. Now, Silent Hill 2 sort of takes the idea of the town and flips it a little bit, where the first game is all about this cult that, basically ruined this town with their culting. But the second game makes the town more of a place of, I guess, punishment or redemption. The town now calls to people who are seeking some kind of judgment. And the storyline of Silent Hill 2, I really wish they would have turned it into a movie, because I really think Silent Hill 2 has not only one of the best survival horror narratives in that genre, but one of the best narratives in video games, period. Like the twist, the Hitchcockian, Shyamalanian twist at the end, it really throws you for a loop. Not to mention just the themes that the game is presenting, also really sticks with you, and I don't know, it's just a really, really, really excellent game. If you haven't played Silent Hill 2, you guys really need to go out and play Silent Hill 2. So when you get to Silent Hill 3, the series really takes sort of a turn. It kind of moves away from the ideas that Silent Hill 2 presented, and unfortunately, no other game in the series really presented those ideas again. The sort of the purgatory of Silent Hill, and that kind of thing. One of the big things with Silent Hill 3 is a return to the narrative of the first game and sort of continuing that one on. So, in that regard, I think Silent Hill 3, the first three Silent Hill games, in my view, in my, relatively worthless opinion. Um, the first three Silent Hill games for me are pretty perfect, narrative-wise. I think they all work extremely well. Um, but yeah, in going back to the more, I guess, cult feel, the more pulpy feel of the first Silent Hill, maybe Silent Hill 3 loses a little something. Not something major, but maybe just a little something that Silent Hill 2 had over Silent Hill 3. Still, it has another one of my favorite scary scenes in the game where I think it's in the hospital. You're in the hospital, which, Silent Hill always has these great locations of the school, which is terrifying, a hospital, which is terrifying, just these normal locations that get turned into these nightmare areas. So you're in the hospital, and the hospital and the prisons are always the worst places in these games. And you go into a room, and there's a mirror, and you see your character, reflected in the mirror, and you're just kind of walking around, and eventually the reflection stops moving and just stares at you. And then as it stares at you, it starts to get like bloodied and diseased looking. And then you start to see the blood and the disease drain out of the mirror image and drain into the room that you're in and start to drain your character. And the entire time I saw this scene for the first time, I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, my character's dying, I'm going to die, I haven't saved in a while, that kind of thing. But it's a totally, narrative-based scene, but it's so effective somehow. Maybe horror works better as a game because it affects you personally, this is your avatar in there, and you don't want them to die because then you're going to get set back and things like that. So anyway, Silent Hill 3, you play it, and it's extremely good. Not as good as Silent Hill 2, but still very, very good. And then you get to Silent Hill 4, and the Silent Hill 4 is where they start, to quote Mike Love talking about the Beach Boys recording of Pet Sounds, fucking with the formula. Silent Hill 4 was originally supposed to be, if I remember correctly, it was supposed to be a completely new IP, and then they decided to just turn it into a Silent Hill game. And it's connected to storyline stuff from Silent Hill 2, but it's not really a continuation of Silent Hill 2, if that makes any sense whatsoever. There's a little narrative thread in Silent Hill 2 that gets more fleshed out in Silent Hill 4. But on the whole, I still found Silent Hill 4, The Room, as it's called, to be extremely effective, especially when you're actually in the apartment. Like that in and of itself was a really great addition to the series. And unfortunately, it was one that, not continued. But you wouldn't really want it to be continued because it would just become, old hat. Oh, I'm stuck in this room again, and things are going crazy. Like, it works in the one game, but maybe not necessarily in if they continue to do it. So it was a good experiment. After that, I believe it was Homecoming that came out next, and Homecoming got a real bad rap, but I really enjoyed Homecoming. It incorporated some stuff from the Silent Hill movie, the sort of the idea that Silent Hill was a coal mining town, and that there's a fire burning underneath, a coal fire that sort of started this whole mess. The whole idea of Silent Hill is kind of based on Centralia, Pennsylvania, which you've never looked up Centralia, Pennsylvania. Google that, because it's a really, really interesting story about this town that had a coal mine basically completely underneath of it. The mine caught fire, and then basically like the ground was just smoldering, and people had to move out because there was this huge, I think it's still burning today. This is like 40, 50 years later. fire burning underneath the town, and like there's only like 5 people that live in the town now. But kind of the basis for Silent Hill. So they incorporated some of that stuff from the movie, and I thought that was a good thing to do. But I found Homecoming to be a really good story and a really good game, and I don't know why it got the drumming that it did. I mean, it's sort of just classic Silent Hill. It wasn't really until you get to Downpour, and Downpour is the one that I really don't like Downpour. They kind of make it a much more open world style game, which I don't think really benefits Silent Hill at all. I mean, I guess it makes it more realistic to how the experience would be to be in the town, but it kind of takes something away from the game, and I don't know, because you never really know where you're supposed to head next. You're constantly getting attacked in this game. I mean, the enemies just respawn all the time. So you're under constant threat, and that is scary. But at the same time, it just gets kind of frustrating and annoying. And Downpour is the only one that I have not finished yet. I might go back to it someday, but I probably won't. The experience was just so bad, and maybe it was just I wasn't in the mood for that style of game at the time. I thought I was, and then I ended up not being in the mood. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever get back to Downpour or not. It's just not something that is really. I'm not really chomping at the bit to get to it, I guess. So after Downpour, it kind of seemed like Silent Hill was just going to disappear because Konami is Konami. They don't really believe in the video game market anymore. It doesn't seem like so. But then there's rumblings of this game called PT, or this little thing called PT that was on the PlayStation Store. And everyone was just going on and on about how it is like one of the most terrifying experiences you'll ever have. And I remember I played it right. I waited till it was night. I turned the lights off. I turned the sound up. And that's how I played PT. It was in the complete dark. And let me tell you, you can't get this anymore because Konami took it off the shop. So if you're lucky enough to buy a PlayStation 4 that has it on the hard drive, because if I delete PT off my hard drive, it's gone forever. I'll never be able to play it again, and I don't want that. So I still have it saved on my hard drive. It's not going to go anywhere. Yeah. So if you ever get the experience to play it, or which I don't know how you would, but it is one of the most terrifying experiences in a video game I've had. Like, there were times where I just didn't want to continue forward because I just didn't want something to pop out at me, because it's in the first person perspective, and I think that makes everything a little bit scarier when it's in the first person perspective. But so many things were done right in PT. Now, to get the true ending, the puzzle you have to do is incredibly obtuse, but so many things were done right in PT that it's one of the biggest gaming tragedies I feel like here in recent time, that game, the full game of Silent Hills, is never going to be released. Maybe Kojima and his new company will do something like what he was planning to do with Konami. I don't know. But, I would have loved to see what Silent Hills was actually going to be. But it's not going to come. But PT is really amazing. And it kind of sounds like maybe PT inspired Resident Evil 7 a little bit. Because Resident Evil 7 is played from the first-person perspective. And, I played one of the demos of Resident Evil 7. And it was okay. My friend Ernie brought over his VR headset, and I did that, and it was kind of scary, but at the same time, like, the uncanny valley of it was just kind of, you're just like, yeah, I mean, everything's in 3D, but you can tell, like, nothing's grabbing a hold of you. So, I mean, VR is kind of cool, but at the same time, I don't know. It doesn't give you the full experience, so my brain just kind of says, well, this is even less real than just watching a 2D thing on a screen for some reason. I don't know why. Plus, I get a little bit motion sick, so that wasn't very good either. But I do plan on getting Resident Evil 7 at some point in time and playing it, because I hear nothing but great things about it. But aside from the, aside from the Silent Hill series, there really hasn't been any big horror series that I've really loved. There's Bloodborne. That is a very Lovecraftian take on horror, which I think Lovecraft's version of horror I really enjoy. So there's that. But kind of looking at my games down here, I guess you can consider Doom kind of horror. I don't know. I played. What was that? Outlast. I played Outlast, and I had some fun with it, but. I really just don't care for the hiding style of games. Where you have to run and you have to hide, and I mean, I don't know. It doesn't really do anything for me to run and hide. Now, I will say that the parts of Outlast that you had to use the night vision on your camera, I thought that was insanely effective and insanely terrifying. Like I didn't want to move forward. But the whole hiding in, like, lockers and things like that. Oh, Jesus. Stepped on a cat toy there. God, I'm going to die doing this episode. There's the horror. What was I going to say? God damn it. The whole hiding in lockers thing, I could leave that. But, yeah, some of the other series, I guess, Onimusha, that's kind of a survival horror. There's the House of the Dead games. I do love light gun games with zombies and things like that. Those are fun. But yeah, looking at my games down here, talk about horror games. Oh, Eternal Darkness. How did I fucking forget about Eternal Darkness? Eternal Darkness is probably one of the greatest survival horror games out there, because it not only messes with... Oh, and there's another game I need to talk about after we talk about Eternal Darkness, because I'm already on Eternal Darkness. Yeah, it's not only a game that, like, the characters get messed with in the game also messes with you. And I remember playing it, and the game has this sanity meter. And as your sanity meter goes down, crazy shit starts happening. Like, the screen will flip upside down and stuff like that. But one of the most nefarious things is it'll actually act like it turns off your GameCube. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, oh my god, what just happened? And I almost made the mistake of reaching forward and hitting the power button. And, like, right as soon as my hand got close to the GameCube, it flicked back on. And I was like, oh god. And then I read later that it's supposed to happen. And there's another thing where it says, it says your memory card's erased and all that kind of stuff. So, Eternal Darkness, I think you can only play it on the GameCube. And it's one of those archaic survival horror games, but I think everyone should give that a shot, because it's just so cool to see a game continually mess with you like that one does. But anyway, let me see how long I've been recording here, because I don't want this to be too long. 39 minutes. We'll go ahead and we'll finish this out with probably... It's a survival horror game, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's scary. But it's a game I think everyone should try. And I personally really love the game and the world and the characters and all that. And we're going to talk about Deadly Premonition. Now, this game is, in all intents and purposes, Twin Peaks, the video game. I mean, it's such an homage. Oh, and there's another game. Fuck, Alan Wake. Alan Wake. How did I forget about Alan Wake? I'm sitting here waiting on Alan Wake 2. We'll talk about both these games together because they kind of do the different things, but they kind of do the same thing in a way. But anyway, Deadly Premonition is essentially Twin Peaks, the video game. And, I mean, if you love Twin Peaks, you'll want to play both Alan Wake and Deadly Premonition because they both kind of tread that homage type thing where it's like, I'm giving the cats water. Like, you guys don't understand how busy it's been. This is the reason why I haven't been doing episodes, because it's just like everything happens all at once. Anyway, so Deadly Premonition, basically Twin Peaks, the video game. Not really scary in any regard, but just a very singular experience. And it's a singular experience in the way that, how do I want to put this? It's one of those things you just have to kind of see to believe. Kind of like, I don't want to say it like this because I don't want to make you guys think that this is a bad game by any stretch of the means. It's not a bad game. It's just sort of a mid-tier game that's not as polished as a AAA. But it's kind of like watching The Room, where you just sit there and you're just kind of in disbelief in a little bit about how insane everything is in the game. So I'm not going to talk too much on Deadly Premonition, but it's a very singular experience that everyone needs to have. And you might hate it, you might love it, but for those people who find its quirks and charms endearing, it's not a game that's ever going to leave your brain. And then Alan Wake. Alan Wake is a big homage to Twin Peaks, Stephen King, stuff like that. Not necessarily scary in the same way that like Silent Hill or that kind of stuff is, but more just kind of unsettling, especially as the game goes on and as the story bears on. You're kind of wondering, it kind of leaves you wondering what the hell is going on, especially after you play the DLC. It leaves you with a lot of questions that unfortunately I don't know if they're ever going to get answered with Alan Wake 2. I don't know if we're ever going to see Alan Wake 2. I don't know. But I do know that if Microsoft wants me to buy an Xbox One, they will announce Alan Wake 2 for Xbox One, and then I'll run out and buy one just so I can play Alan Wake 2. That's how much I like Alan Wake. I don't know why it slipped my brain, but I love Alan Wake. I love Deadly Premonition. Silent Hill 2, fantastic. Resident Evil 2, fantastic. Resident Evil 4, really great. 5, not so much. 6, I never played. I never played Resident Evil 6, so I don't know. Code Veronica, Resident Evil is very good. But yeah, survival horror games. They're not really my big cup of tea, but I do enjoy them from time to time. So I guess that about wraps this up. I can't think of anything else I really need to talk about in terms of horror games, horror movies, horror books. I guess I do like to read horror books. I think they kind of put you more into the mindset of the characters and the situations because your brain's creating the story as opposed to just reacting to it. But it's just it's one of those things that I don't really get too much into, but on the occasion I do like a few things here and there in the genre. So anyway, guys, that's it for this. You guys can probably hear there's a little cooing baby in the background, so I gotta tend to her. So I want to thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully this was coherent. It's been a while since I've done one of these, so yeah, I might have just rambled for 45 minutes and not really said much of anything. But anyway, guys, thanks so much for listening. Take care, and we'll see you next time.